Good morning, Docpreneur Nation, or good evening. This is the Docpreneur Leadership Podcast, and we have a special treat for you. Have you ever tried standing perfectly still for an entire minute? You might realize, and your patients probably know this, that it's harder than you think. And so our guest today is Katharine Forth, and she is with ZIBRIO. That's ZIB as in boy, RIO.com, ZIBRIO.com. And we're going to talk today about the science of standing still and what the unique things that Katie and her team are doing. They are working in measurement-based fall prevention. And I know that for a lot of doctors, even my family included, that's kind of a big deal, is stairs, falling, balance, all these types of things. Katie, thanks for being with us here in the Docpreneur Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'll add to that list athletes as well. We always want to perform better.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Well, if you want to go ahead and pull up your slides, when we stand still, your body is actually making a lot of small adjustments. And you know this as a physician treating patients on a daily basis. It's making these small adjustments to try and keep upright. And the ZIBRIO, what their team is doing is they've created something. I love inventors. I love talking to people in healthcare who are inventing and innovating things that are really sensitive, really measurement and evidence and science and fact-based and evidence-based. And this is going to be something that I think all of you are going to lean in. If you're just listening to the audio version of this, you can go to fourdoctorsforum.org or go to conciergemedicinetoday.com and watch the presentation visually so that you can see what we're talking about. But we'll put that link in the show notes below. But Katie, I'm going to let you have the vehicle here and let you start talking.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you can see from this image just here, I was not supposed to be an inventor, really. I was an academic. So I have a PhD in human neurophysiology for movement control, particularly to do with spaceflight. And so it was while I was at NASA in the neuroscience laboratory that with two other people, we really invented the core technology to the ZIBRIO technology that we have today. And it's one of those funny moments because, of course, NASA's a brilliant place. My office was right next to Mars where they tested all the rovers. And, you're looking at things, not just, how people say, think out of the box, but we're always thinking out of the planet. And that really frees you up in terms of where the science can take you. So, the story of ZIBRIO most definitely starts off from space. We're always measuring astronauts when they return from microgravity exposures, always measuring their balance. Obviously, you've got some adaptations to microgravity, includes your vestibular system. We know about muscle loss, bone loss, but there's also the sensory motor degradation that can occur. And I've got a picture here, which is, perhaps a bit amusing, but you've got a number of different astronauts that fell down on the moon. So as people are contemplating Martian expeditions, I mean, that's 6 months there, 6 months back. It's a really long time to have degradation occurring in your body. And we know from even being on the moon with altered gravity, yes, they are wearing these big suits and things, but they did fall over. And it can happen to them, and it happens to a lot of people here on Earth. And while we're at NASA, created this amazing technology that I will talk about. But we were sitting there at lunch one day. I had a grandmother who had fallen, broken her hip. Sadly, it did lead to her demise. And my co-founder, same experience. And when you've got the power, this advancement at your fingertips, I mean, we couldn't just keep it just for astronauts. So that's when we're like, okay, we have to do something. This can help a lot of people. Let's do it. And we literally got up from that table at lunch and went off to do it. So, it seems quite simple and maybe even naive at that point. But yeah, we are at the point now that people can be helped with this technology. So one stat that I think everyone needs to know is that falling down is now the #1 reason for trauma death and trauma injury That's at any age. So that's more than car crashes. I mean, it's happening a lot. And if you're older, if you're over 65, well, now 28% of those people will fall down every single year. I mean, it's such a huge issue, but yet, what is there to really solve it? You have a variety of different things, but of course, there's loads and loads of risk factors for falling, and how do you even know if any of them work? And this is where it gets really difficult for doctors. You're seeing you're seeing a patient in a snapshot moment in time. You're trying to then counsel them across 21 risk factors. I mean, it's very challenging to solve this problem. So I think going from our space flight experience, and for anybody that has any knowledge of balance measurement, the typical way is to measure the forces under the feet. So this is a stabilogram that you're seeing here. And there's a big piece of equipment that you can see. This is what we did use at NASA, but ultimately it's that force measuring capability from a force plate under the feet. And the stabilograms that you can see, this is for two different people, one with eyes open standing, one with eyes closed. They're mostly the same. And so what can you do with a stabilogram? It's like, well, how big is it? How much are you moving, swaying over that period of time? How fast are you moving? These are some of the traditional metrics that you use to capture and identify balance and poor balance. But it's limited, and it has very little predictive capability for falling down in the future. So the piece that we had invented at NASA was we used artificial intelligence to then look at the stabilogram and see when is the body in control and when is it having moments of micro failure. So this isn't a functional test. This is really looking at how the body is controlling itself. So you can cluster it to see what's going on. And those two traces that you just saw, they suddenly look a lot different when we classify these different regions. And then on top of that, you can just do it in 60 seconds with your eyes open. So if we can see these moments of micro failure when someone is just standing, no harness required, well, now people can measure themselves at home easily in primary care and in concierge practices. So it just really makes it very accessible.
This is really neat.
Yeah, and so, of course, that's the start of the journey. We then had to validate that to see, well, does it in fact predict? Is it predictive? And sure enough, it is. And that is published data. So we take that look of the stabilogram and we use numerous different metrics. We put it into this easy to understand score from 1 to 10. 1, 2, and 3 is high risk for falling. 4, 5, 6 is moderate risk. 7, 8, 9, and 10, that's now low risk for falling. And that is predictive of whether someone's going to fall down in the next 12 months. So 60-second test, now you can see into the future as to what's going on, and you can stratify your patients to then help them. So as a screening tool, just off the get-go, we're already getting value for patient care, value as a tool for doctors. And this score is actually 2 to 4 times better than current clinical practices. So it's very, very sensitive. The next question is, well, then what? So I know someone's at risk. What do I even do? Those 21 risk factors are still floating about. And that's where we've actually done an awful lot of work over the years to build up the resources to help guide people through, even if they don't have the specialized knowledge of, say, a specialist of some kind or a balance physiology researcher. And so we have then software to help guide the clinician, but also we've got an app that can help the patient. So we really want to empower everybody in all of this. You empower the individual, you empower the physician. And I think one of the things that's amazing is that when people stand on our scale, it's like they have an epiphany. So if you have that stubborn older relative who, you know, is in denial, or even, you know, patient denial is a big deal too, get them on the scale, and suddenly they've got they have an epiphany. They feel things that they haven't felt before, because trying to stand, as you said at the beginning, trying to stand for 1 minute, you can't do it. It's impossible. And people are suddenly aware of these little movements, and that in of itself is really educational. Then they see their score. It's a cold, hard, objective score, and they can't. It's very hard to have the denial after that, because it's not somebody nagging them or telling them what their risk is. It's just there. It's just a number. So, I mean, we've seen that we've done screenings in senior centers, and we've found that people they sign up to more exercise classes after they've measured themselves. One activity director came up to me and said, "What did you do?" Because we've had more people sign up for our activity classes in the last 2 hours than the last 6 months.
Wow.
So, you know, that was a pretty big sign. And anytime we do any kind of health fair or screenings, we have to go ready with materials of what classes do they offer, because people want information and they want it now. There's no delaying them. So that those pieces of support that I showed on the right, this is part of it, because we know that it's a little bit like opening Pandora's box. And we always talk to any users that are managing a population that you have to be prepared that this is going to open them up. They'll want to talk about a lot of things just because of this balance score.
Wow, absolutely.
And we do.
I'm gonna, before you move on to that, is this also helping with the stare? I mean, by analyzing this stuff and then making some changes in their lives, are they also finding, or are we maybe skipping ahead too early? And this is your next invention, is going to be something to do with the stairs. Is this finding also helping them create balance, climbing stairs, getting that strength for that, or that's something that we're really just need to table for another day? I'm just thinking of the family members who are struggling with balance, and stairs is something that's so scary for them.
Yeah, so already it's happening with you, Michael. It's opening up already, and this is what I mean. It's really quite beautiful. If you're a clinician of any kind, you want to know so that you can help guide them. And if they're keeping the information to themselves, it makes it very hard to do the job that you want to do. For some people, the strength is the important part. For others, it could be that their vestibular system is difficult. I'll actually just go back one slide. You can see here that there's a little wheel, looks like pie wedges. We actually do simplify the risk factors into the 6 pillars of balance. And this really helps to educate the patient on things that are helping and hurting their balance. So you can see that it's colored there. So there is, again, it's very small. I actually have it bigger in a slide later on.
Yeah,
so we
great.
can talk
That's
a
going
little
to
bit
be
more about it.
I can already see, for example, like with my mom, you know, I could see her spending so much time on this type of patient balance coach app where, you know, yeah, I'm going to talk to my doctor about this in the future. But for those physicians who have patients over the age of 50 and 60, you know, who haven't taken care of themselves, and, you know, this is a really great tool and a conversation starter, like you said, to really, like, I mean, it's going to open up a wealth of knowledge and insight and communication inside of the exam room. So be prepared if you're a physician listening.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So one of our concierge physicians that's used it, he actually told me that he had a retired nurse test, and as she then came to him for, you know, the counseling and follow-up meeting, he then, in the conversation, because she actually had a score that she wasn't so pleased with, I think it was a 4, and she was a bit shocked because she looks after herself. And so in opening up the conversation and talking about it, she then actually shared a new piece of information, which is that her hip had been hurting. and her lower back had been hurting, and that and this was something that was completely new to him. And so he then actually had a chance to talk about that issue, and he prescribed PT for the lower back and added in a note, and please work on the balance as well. And so, there's just one example of many that, you start with this score. People now, they want to talk. They want to move on.
Yeah.
So there's so much. We could talk for hours.
I have other questions rolling around. Yeah, absolutely. But go ahead and keep going.
Yeah, I'll get some sort of base things in, and then we can really just delve into lots of questions. But so this is a concierge practice that is within the Edward Elmhurst Health System in Chicago. So they've been using the scale. After they used it for 2 months, they actually shared their data with us. It was part of our arrangement. And one of the things we're able to see is that the current full risk assessment that they were using, it was a standard gait assessment, perfectly adequate and kind of normal practice. But you can see that most people, 84% of them, actually fit into a score of 3. And this was to walk 4 meters, and then it's timed. So the vast majority, they just were normal in a 3, and then the at-risk is 6 seconds and above. So if you're looking at your population, they were able to identify 7% of the population as being at risk. But then, as you can see over on the other graph, these are the same people, but it's with the score from our scale. The scale is called the Stability Pro Scale. So suddenly, now you've got this range. Not only is it a range to view your patients, but it's also a range to view your individual patient. Are they improving? Are they getting worse? If you're just 3 and then you're staying 3, and then suddenly one day you're a 7, that's not big news. Other things are going to show as well. And so, giving a tool that really gives this spread, I think is something that they highly value. And they put a couple of quotes here because it's creating quite a buzz in the clinic. So this is the Concierge clinic within their health system. I believe they're under the MDVIP network as well. Okay. So yeah, it's creating a buzz, and they get a report. The patients get a report, and the physicians get a report out of it too. And then there's that quote, that second quote, which is that patient denial. It's helping them to coach their patients, to give them the information that their patients need, because now they're receptive. Yeah. So this is the slide that I think you really want to delve into. This is where I think all the questions are going to get asked and answered. So you get your score, and then the next main thing is, well, now what? So we know we know the probabilities. So if somebody scores, 1, 2, and 3, then we know the likelihood of their full risk for that next 12 months. Same for the yellow and same for the green. But we also have other insights from our research, things like the type of fall people are most likely to experience. So in one of our papers that was published, so there's a nice graph there that actually shows, so people who are in the green. So Michael, let's just assume that you scored an 8 out of 10. 10 is near impossible, by the way. That's like Simone Biles on a good day. Mm-hmm. So let's just say you scored an 8, which is great. And so you then want to know, well, what does that mean? Well, you are, maybe you're in the top 25th percentile for your age group. But then does that mean that you won't fall? No, it doesn't. You can never say that no one's going to fall, because falling ultimately is an accident, but it's no accident that it happens. So this is where the mentality and the psychology really comes into it. The type of fall, even though you have a much lower probability of falling, but the type of fall that you're most likely to experience if you did fall would be a slip or a trip. So people in the green 72% of the people who fell that were in the green, it was due to a slip or a trip. So now I think I've got Michael's attention. So if I say, okay, Michael, here's how you avoid slips and trips, suddenly that changes the conversation, because if I came straight into this and said, hey, Michael, here's some information on slips and trips. You might want to put a bath mat in and you know, spread out your rugs. You'd be like, whatever, you know, I'm not going to fall down. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that specificity, those insights really, I mean, we've already opened up the patient, and now we're getting into information that matters. So it's the personalization. So you can see here on the left, this is the software for doctors. So the doctors, after somebody scores, there's a few questions that often the nurses will fill out, and then there is a healthcare practitioner's recommendation report. On that report will be just the basic information of the score and the risk category, but then we have the percentile. Now, it doesn't matter what your age is for risk. Risk is just risk. If you're in the red, you're in the red. But it is helpful for patients to understand how do I compare to my age cohort. So here's another story of a 94-year-old. She was at a balance screening and she said, she got a 2. She said, well, I'm 94, aren't I? Of course I got it. And I said, well, actually, that puts you in the lower 25th percentile for your age group. She said, well, people can score higher in my age? Absolutely. They score 5s and 6s. Well, okay then. And then she was now moving towards contemplating new behaviors. And just from the very simple context of that percentile of her score. So you can see on that chart, it is an interesting trend. So on average, the big thick line, that's your average line, the 50th percentile. After 60, it drops about a point per decade. So that's a 10% reduction in your balance after the 60s if you're not changing anything. So the name of the game is, how do you lift yourself to a different category? How do you push yourself into a different percentile? So the recommendations.
So go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'll save it for later.
Recommendations. Okay, so the recommendations, you know, it's along a number of different risk factors, of course, but it provides the rationale behind why that recommendation is made. So it's clinical decision-making software.
Wow. I'll save my questions until the end for you.
Oh no, you go right ahead.
Well, I'm wondering.
There's a tiny delay, so sorry about
that. So one of my thoughts is, you know, thinking of your typical geriatric patient has some hip problems. In the next year, probably going to have hip surgery. Doctor puts her on this scale, gets a reading, makes some adjustments, but still is going to need hip surgery, whether it's degenerative or whatever. And then, so how often is one unique patient going to be needing or using this inside of a typical practice of, say, 500 patients?
Oh,
you could put all 500 on it, but I'm just wondering then, how often are you reevaluating? Is it every single time they come in for their annual physical, once a year, 3 times a year? I would think that it would be more than just one time a year. It would be many times.
Yeah, so, you know, you start off with your annual screening. It's required with Medicare that it's required to measure full risk anyway. So I don't know how the doctors that are watching this today, how they're measuring their full risk. You, of course, can ask, have you fallen in the last 12 months? That is until us, that was the current best predictor of falling down, which is kind of insane because imagine if it was a different condition. Like, well, Michael, we already know that you're at risk for cancer because you've already had it. Yeah. So, you know, I think with that by itself, we know that 69 to 85% of at-risk people for falling are not being identified. So we want to start off with screening. That's really, really important. that now gives you at least that annual touch point and data point. But the value of tracking, it's even more. So we start off with the screening. That's awesome. That's great. But now, if you have somebody who does have a hip problem and they are going to have hip surgery, well, don't you want to know, and don't you want them to know how they're doing in their beforehand and in their rehab as well? Did they get back up to their baseline level? So now this can be very motivating to actually adhere to the PT that they're prescribed. And that actually feeds in rather nicely. I'll go straight to this one, actually. So this particular example, Judy, we measured her for 2 years. I say we, she measured herself. This is where we left a scale in a senior living facility just for open use. And so she started off high risk. She was 87. She was in good health, but she did fall, as we would have predicted. And fortunately, she didn't break anything, but she was prescribed physical therapy. And sure enough, her score went up. So that's great. She did engage in the exercise classes, and there were some balance classes being offered at the facility. So she did that, and she was very committed to it. So that maintained her, which was great. But then there's one thing that happened around the holidays, and that's they canceled all exercise classes for a month, which is just a terrible idea. And sure enough, her score drops. When she resumes her classes and her activity, that's when her score went up. And you'll see that it even went up higher. She was very concerned when it was low. She did actually catch me in the hallway one day and say, you know, I'm scoring low again. I know what happened last time because I fell. I don't want that to happen again. And so she clearly was very motivated to then, you know, do more. So she brought herself up. She even got into the green. She maintained it all year until the following year. Same thing happened. Classes canceled, and her score dropped down. But this time, it took just 1 point for her to know that I know what to do, and back up she went.
Wow.
So
that, I mean, that's almost newsworthy there, where you see, you know, you probably can contact a dozen or 50, you know, senior nursing facilities at home type of things and notice like, okay, why is it in January and February we see so many falls, you know?
that's right.
It's very predictive. I mean, it's so unique. And I think that so many doctors should be leaning into this. I'll let you continue.
Yeah, well, you're making a great point there, because this was really powerful for Judy, and she was empowered to make better health choices. But it's also powerful for anyone who's managing a population, because then you can get these further insights, because now you have a measure that is predictive of the next 12 months. So when she's in the red and she moves out of the red, she's reducing her probability of falling. So it's an outcome measure as well, which again, I will talk to that just a little bit later. But there's so many sides to it. So that was, Judy's story was quite straightforward, because it was exercise, no exercise. She didn't have any other confounding factors. She was very motivated and consistent with her exercise, so you could see very clear traces. Elizabeth was a slightly different scenario. She started a similar sort of age. She started high risk. She began doing balance classes and Tai Chi. And just as you would expect, her score went up. Fantastic. She was thrilled. She kept doing those classes, but her score plummeted, and she didn't know why. Well, she was having a health issue. So now we're starting to see that the score, the main driver of the score wasn't the exercise, it was a clinical condition that was occurring. So that drops down. She does have surgery for this particular issue. And of course, she had medications to do with that surgery. I mean, it's very disruptive to have surgery for one's balance. There's a lot of things that will affect. And so as she's coming, back in her recovery, she was struggling. But she found that one day she decided, I'm just going to take a nap. I'm really tired. She rested for 2 hours and she felt great. She measured herself and her score was up. And she's like, well, I should do that more then, shouldn't I? But she had some rough nights too. So you can see in this trace, there were nights that she reported having a terrible night. And there were days that she said, I rested really well. I had a nap. And you could see it going up. So this was quite an interesting scenario because she was bouncing up and down. So for her, it was helpful to measure because when she scored low, she took it easier. She was not, going off to the shops or anything. She was more careful with herself. And so this feedback for her was really helpful to manage the oscillations that were going on.
Wow. And I noticed on this, for those, I'm going to make a note and into the podcast here, but also for those listening to the audio version, this is really unique slides that you really should be watching. And I'll put the link to the video in the show notes below. But what I'm observing on this particular slide is it looks as though she's measuring at least one time a month, if not maybe a little bit more. Is it an accurate assumption based on these 20 to 24 months we're looking at?
Yeah, so, to go to your original question, I didn't fully answer, you take your snapshots. And then if you've got somebody who's more stable in their balance, so someone that perhaps they're younger, perhaps they're fitter and in good health, don't have any other medications or problems, they're already scoring high, you may want to it may be an annual check. It may be every 6 months, when they come in, hop on the scale, see where you are. But anytime there's somebody who is trying to improve, has problems, is trying to figure things out, a greater frequency is going to be more valuable to them. This particular person and Judy before, they were approximately every week or every 2 weeks. That was their frequency. We do have scales for home use, so remote patient monitoring. So you can actually just get daily feeds from your patients. So if there's somebody who is that you'd like to get a closer look at, that's something you can do. And something you can note from both of these traces is that balance it's not like cholesterol. Cholesterol takes 6 months to change. This can change very rapidly for good, but also for bad. And so there's at least some optimism there that you can then get some good improvements and tangible improvements when you measure it from lifestyle behavior change. So that's one piece of value there, that when you're doing the frequent tracking, you can then see and you can intervene, but you can also adjust the intervention. So if you, as a physician, you're looking at the medications, maybe you just change blood pressure medication. Well, for 2 weeks, as you'll know, balance is going to be off. It's going to be compromised during that 2-week period of when the body's getting used to that new blood pressure medication. It'd be lovely to know how much does it affect the balance and when are they feeling okay again, because there's some good learning and advice that can be provided around that. Sleep is particularly noxious to one's balance, so we often start there when we're talking to people, because it's different for doctors. You're already talking about sensitive topics, but if you're just talking wellness in just a health screening scenario, 2 out of 3 people don't get the score that they think they should get. So you now are getting into a state of having to gently guide them through so that they can understand themselves better. And sleep is a really good one. We actually had a concierge doctor who brought the scale to his practice, and he's really excited because he's seen the science. He hops on, measures himself, and he got 5. He's 37 or so, and he got a 5. And he's like, what? Wow. Like, I understand this is really good for all my patients, but why did I get that? So, you just gently ask, well, how did you sleep last night? Knowing what his occupation is. He said, oh, terribly. Like,
Yeah.
okay. So you may like to try and get some more sleep and see how you test tomorrow. And sure enough, he had a great night's sleep that night, tested up at an 8.
Wow.
So even, it's quite fun. You can hop on it in different scenarios. It is measuring the state that you're in that moment in time. So that's based on your blood glucose levels. If you've got a diabetic, that's based on the medication timing. If you have a Parkinsonian patient, that is based on the fatigue. That's based on, did they just work out the night before or the hour before you test? We do see, so with sleep, you can get up to 40% reduction in balance just from one bad night's sleep. As I said, it's a very sensitive machine. But if you do a spin class or some heavy weights, that jelly leg feeling you have, it's real. It's real. And your score can drop 10 to 30% immediately after doing a hard spin class. So yes, the snapshot is great. Having some level of tracking is really valuable. And then you also have to understand that, gosh, there is a lot of learning you can do with shoes, without shoes, put a backpack on. We had a cameraman at a particular video screening that we're doing for a TV show. And he said, well, can I go on with my utility belt? I wear this all the time. It's all front loaded. So he hopped on with his equipment. And, it tells you how well you can control yourself in the state in which you're standing on the scale. Wow.
This is interesting, fascinating. So for those listening, I want you to encourage you, go to the show notes below and please click on the YouTube video link and let's really dive into the data here that she's sharing. Our guest today is Katharine Forth. She is with ZIBRIO, which is a measurement-based fall prevention scale and tool that I was just talking with several doctors yesterday on a different podcast unrelated to this topic area. And one of the complaints that came out of physicians, practices was we feel under-resourced. We feel like we don't have enough tools in our tool belt, or, we just don't know which of the good ones to choose. And this is something I think once you dive into what Katie's talking about here, I think that you'll see the enthusiasm that your patients may have for this.
Yeah, and it's all based on science. It has rigor behind it. It's all published data. So, even down to the user experience, we take a very scientific approach to that. And I think one of the key things is, so you've got the ability to screen, you've got the ability to track, you have the ability to create an outcome measure for your program or intervention efficacy, treatment efficacy. And then it changes the game, because now anytime you're trying to reduce falls, you don't have to wonder, well, are they going to fall in the next 12 months? Do I have to track that? So you do something, wait 12 months to see. No, right now, if you score this low number, then that relates to a certain probability across the next 12 months. So we could take a snapshot of your population and tell you how many falls you could expect in the next 12 months. And then, of course, you go about the business of trying to prevent those. But the way to do it is to shift them from the red into a different color. So we saw with Judy and with Elizabeth that, they were actively working on the shifting and what was necessary for them. But if you can shift them out of the red and even into just the yellow, then you get a reduction by 20 to 33%. So that's the name of the game. And we can see that can happen on average by 34 days. So, it is very much in the reach of everyone to be able to do that. It's just a question of figuring out exactly what that piece is, that key that unlocks the balance for that particular person.
Wow. Talk to us a little bit about in your day in the slide I'm looking at. The person is measuring at a 2, and then they may eventually make a shift into from the red at 2. Means they're probably going to fall pretty soon, to the yellow, and it looks like they baseline at about 5. Within month 2.5, 3. Talk to us about what changes are occurring in that shift between month 2 and month 3, and the average shift you're noting here is 34 days. What's happening in that 34 days?
Yeah, well, it's a variety of different things. And so on the 6 pillars that I had up here, so you can see on the right, we've got a little wheel there. It's about trying to find what is the thing that makes the difference to that particular patient. So if, and this is where the recommendations on the left side is doing the work for you. But this patient app is a chance to let them explore for themselves. And it does, in fact, give a wellness plan as well that you can see just to the right of the main front app screen. So the education is really important. If they sleep badly and they've changed their medications, they're not doing enough exercise, it's hard to know what to focus on. And we want to make sure that the patient is aware of the things that are hurting their balance, but we want them to also be aware of what's helping their balance so they keep doing it. So if you're doing really well in your exercise, but you're sleeping badly and you're like, oh, I scored poorly, that's annoying. Okay, I'm going to sleep better, but then maybe the exercise has dropped off. I'm still scoring badly, I give up. It's a minefield. There's so many different things that can change. And so this image and this app is there to help them explore. The yellow means hindering, by the way. So maybe they can't do anything about the medical conditions. Maybe they can't do anything about the prescriptions. That's okay, because we're looking at the whole thing. So if you can't change those pieces, can you boost up the others? My colleague likes to talk about this as like it's a team sport. So all those different things are, team members. And if one team member can't quite do it, then, you boost up the other team member so that they can. So, so for the clinician, they're provided that information through the healthcare practitioner's recommendation report. But we strongly encourage the patients to also explore themselves so that, all of these things that can affect your balance that happens at home and it doesn't happen in the clinic, they can be working on that and learning about that too.
Wow. I'll let you go ahead and continue with your slides. There's a lot there.
There is a lot. Yeah, it's and really this is sort of the last main slide anyway, but what we did find is that when we left the scale in that senior living for open use, it was supposed to be a study that helped us to refine something about our full prediction. And then we quickly realized, well, there was 2 things that happened. Firstly, it was supposed to be just a 4-month study, and then the older adults, the residents, they wanted to keep it, and then they told their friends about it, and people kept signing up, and so it was just a growing population, and we didn't want to take it away from them because they found it so valuable. But the other thing that happened is that we weren't seeing the rates of falls that we expected based on their fall rates from the previous year. 2 years later, we finally stopped the study. So it was a very longitudinal study that Judy and Elizabeth were part of. That's why we have such good data on them. And but what we found is, in fact, there was a 54% reduction in falls from the previous year, and we didn't give them an intervention. All they did was measure themselves. Now, there were exercise classes and balance classes available to them should they want to self-select, but we didn't promote anything. We didn't talk to them about it or make any recommendations. So this is also a published study that you can see the reference, the citation there. It's something that we attribute to an increase in self-efficacy and self-regulation. They changed their lifestyle behaviors, just as you saw for Elizabeth and for Judy. what was actually happening with them, and getting that score. Well, it's like the Fitbit effect. People are walking extra laps around their living room because they have to hit that number, and people were trying to hit numbers, and they were experimenting and trying new things. So and I will say this was a 54% reduction in the number of people who fell, but it was a 74% reduction in the number of falls.
Wow.
So yes, pretty compelling data. And imagine if you just overlay on top of that some actual care, some medicine and care.
Yeah. Wow. This is fascinating. There are very few interviews that you remain leaned in, kind of those, what do they call those? The nonverbals, where your body language is always leaned in. I've had a lot of great interviews over the years, and this is definitely one that I think that for those physicians listening, you're going to continue to remain leaned in on. If you're watching this, I think you'll have the enthusiasm that I see, and the potential for your patient population and your local community to just be healthier and to be more just aware, lifestyle behavior. And, I know that there are some physicians listening who are probably have patients, maybe even this morning or this afternoon or tomorrow or last week, that came in and they're walking out of your office, slowly at best. And you're thinking, there's a fall coming in their life. I have no idea when, but I know it worries them, and we think about our family members who are getting old in age, and you're like, it's coming for you. You just don't know when. And this certainly doesn't predict when, but it predicts, like, it gives you an awareness of, okay, you can take some steps now to help prevent this. So.
Absolutely. And, there's that visual that people are so used to doing. You look at somebody and say, you look like, you're getting wobbly, but we can see things decades before that. I even found my 20-year-old computer engineer, he hadn't measured himself he measured himself the first time, and he scored, I think it was a 2.
Wow.
And so he was shocked. And I said gently, well, have you exercised last week? No. In the last month? No. When's the last time you exercised? Not for 2 years. And of course, he's just been sitting at a computer late at night, every night. And well, that was a good shock for him. So, I mean, we've got lots of lovely stories like that. This one lady came in, she had a walker. So in she comes, and she scored a 7. And gently asked, well, who prescribed you the walker? Oh, it was my late husband's. I took it when he died.
Wow.
So, using a walker actually increases your risk for falling. It's a short-term help, but it actually increases your risk for falling. And so for her, where she was measuring pretty well, that wasn't going to help her for any longevity. So, in that conversation, you encourage them to speak to their doctors. So it's, there's so many different stories like that. Surprise that people will have. You do find, and I will mention this, that there's a range that people will score in. You kind of get a sense for what that range is. So for me, and I am actually an elite athlete, when I'm peak performance, I'm scoring a 9. But if I'm ill, like flu or something, I can score a 6. So if I'm scoring a 6 or a 7, that makes me think, something's not quite right. And then I look at myself. If I'm scoring 8s and 9s, I'm like, cool, I'm doing just fine. So when you get that snapshot, you're actually trying to determine, are they at the upper end of their range or the lower end of their range? Because that really does help you to interpret what the score is and guide them for the future.
Wow. Fascinating. Well, I'll let you continue or close us out. We have a few questions for you, but I'll let you conclude with some of this.
Well, I thought I'd just show you Joe Montana. So, here's somebody who, he had a chance to see the scale, loved it. And, you think of Joe Montana, he's obviously fit, very physically capable. He is now, is he 61, something like that? And he's aware. I can't remember how many surgeries he said he's had. It's a lot of them. And so anytime you have injuries and surgeries, it takes a lot of effort to get yourself back to 100%. And people don't always get there, as you know. So for him, it was very clear what the value was. And until you test yourself, you have no idea. And I encourage everyone who's listening today to think, well, how well are you balancing today yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can measure it. You can do something about it.
Wow. Well, this has been incredibly insightful. I think very enlightening for many physicians, I hope, listening. And I encourage you, again, we're going to put the video in the show notes below. So please take 30 minutes, start watching this, and contact Katie and her team over here at ZIBRIO. We'll put the contact information as well. So a few quick questions as we kind of run into this to conclude here. What is if a physician wanted to adopt this and incorporate this into their practice, it's obviously very easy to have a patient jump on a scale, and we've all done it the last time that we were at the doctor's office, but this is different than that, and it's something very quick, that the nurses can run into, that the staff can help you with, that you can do inside of an exam room. Let's talk a little bit. Number one, the footprint, obviously, from the photos that we're looking at that you shared is pretty small, inches wise, something you would put on a square foot of a floor for the most part. But the user or learning curve, based on, I have 10 people who stepped on this week, or today rather, how does it separate the data? And then technology wise inside of the software, and then how complicated or how easy is the learning curve to adopt for a nurse who's intaking that exam information to give the doctor to put into the charts?
Yes, absolutely. It's we've aimed to make it as simple as possible. If you can see from the image of the scale there, it's a bit bigger than a bathroom scale. And it's got numbers that are about 2.5 inches, something like that. So the number, well, first you stand on it, you get weight, and then it will beep, a little bit like a microwave, to signal that the test is starting, and then they're to stand as still as they can for 60 seconds. It will beep again at the end, and then the score will illuminate and just show you the number from 1 to 10. Currently, we do not have that so that it automatically connects. So for anyone who's worried about cyber security, you don't have to worry, because it is not connected in that mode at this point. And so for the nurse then filling out the questions, I think it's 6 questions in the Balance Care software, and very straightforward questions that they just plug it in. So what's the score? Drop down, put it, age, and then a few other questions, things like does the patient exhibit poor leg strength, for example, something along those lines. And then I think the quote that we've had from nurses that have used it is, "It's very intuitive." That's a direct quote. "Oh yeah, that's easy." Is another one when we've asked for feedback. And then they just press the button that says report, and it'll be a PDF that comes up. Currently, our customers are just saving that into their EHR, so they just save it as a PDF. And then for the patient report, press one more button, they get the patient report, and they can then print that out to give to the patient in their going home materials. So that's some of the sort of the workflow of it. With the training side, we have training videos to help the entire process, and they're short, they're to the point, and informative. And again, at the same time, it is just a scale. You stand on the scale, The main thing to note is that's different than standing on a regular scale is that we want them to try and stand as still as possible. There is a poster that is printable in the materials that you get in the bundle. It also has the instructions on it for the patient. So as they're standing there, they're seeing icons that say, don't talk, stand still. So we try and get it from multiple angles. And of course, if there's any other questions, we are fully prepared to support with our support team.
And that goes into the next, the second to last question for you. And that is, what are the next steps for doctors? What do they do now with what they've heard? They've like, I want this, I need this. This can help my patient population so much. And let me also just say for physicians, thinking about like, oh, this, do I really need another tool in my toolbox? I think I think that the reasons are compelling here. And I know that after talking with so many physicians over the years is, patients are going to tell you kind of what's hurting now, fix it. And then you don't really ever get time or get to the root problem of some of the things that are happening in their life where you didn't know that they didn't sleep well last night. You didn't know that they had, hip issues, like one of the examples you provided here, like she went from a higher number to a lower number and then found out, this month, a couple of weeks ago, or today, or this week, I've had hip pain and I just don't know why. Well, that opens up a conversation. And for those physicians who, are not great communicators, have trouble opening up and have trouble getting their patients to open up, what a tremendous way to start the conversation as soon as you walk into the exam room. I mean, this is what you could start the exam room conversation with every single patient, every single day. I could see my doctor, for example, loving this type, because we were just talking about the Apple Watch and two different unique sleep apps that he's testing out and recommended I test out, just to see like, hey, when are you going to sleep? What's your sleep score? And we're using this technology. It's time for doctors to progress and move and past that standard of care, which is old fashioned, and to say, you know what, we can do better. And this is one of those really unique ways to do that. So all of that to say, then the question for you is, what are the next steps that if I'm a physician listening, what should I be doing next?
Yeah, make contact with us. We'd love to hear from you. If you saw my email at the very first slide, it's just Katie, Katey, at ZIBRIO.com. You can email me, or you could go onto our website and follow the path through to the healthcare practitioners and fill out the form of interest. And so that we can then help you understand how best to provide it for your particular practice scenario. It is a reimbursable test, so there is that. And I will just mention that if people have interest in remote patient monitoring, that balanced care dashboard that you can see there, that is something that we're actually looking for pilot partners for at the moment. We're looking to measure 25 patients in a particular practice. If you can see really carefully, you can see a set of bars for what is the percent of population risk, and then how that changes over time. So that will be a more dynamic touch point on your population, and it also provides the prediction of how many falls that will estimate for the next 12 months.
And I will say, from a patient perspective, because if you've listened to this for podcast for a while, or you know me personally, you know that I'm not a physician, and we are not giving medical advice on any of these podcasts. But from a patient, user, consumer perspective, that's how we approach these interviews. That's how we approach what we talk about. How we talk about it is from a patient perspective. Like this is a no-brainer. I would almost choose a doctor based on going to that doctor if they had this type of technology, and we can have more conversations about it every single month or 2 months that I come in. this is from a patient perspective. If you're wondering like, well, how are patients going to respond? Obviously, I think that, you know, from what Katie shared, they're going to respond pretty well. But I also just want to reemphasize, as a patient, I'm not a physician, but I am a patient, and I know what it's like to sit on the other side of the exam room. I know what it's like to sit on the other side of you. And this is something that I think, and you're not paying for me to say this. You're not a sponsor or endorsing this. I just think that this, when I see unique things that can come into a medical practice, especially the ones that are in concierge medicine in particular, I think that this is a no-brainer to have a conversation about some bigger topics in a patient's life that are impacting their overall health. I can see telling my family members who I was, you know, wondering when they were left the house last week after Christmas and New Year's, was like, I wonder if a fall is in that person's life in the next year, because it's sure, they're pretty wobbly, and that's going to happen soon. So let's start these conversations soon. My final question for you, Katie, and you're welcome to riff on that, add anything to that once I ask this question. But the final question for you that I ask of all of our guests is, you know, if there's one particular story or that you're like, you know what, I could hang up my spurs and hand over the keys to the next, you know, leader in line, because this, what happened just now, and I'm sure you've got many stories like this, like Judy's and Elizabeth's, you know, where it's like, this is why we did this. Like, that right there is exactly, we could all die happy, you know? So I know you have probably one of many stories, but you're welcome to end and conclude our time today with that.
Yeah. Well, and so, you know, as you've heard, there is a lot of content around all of this, which is why concierge medicine is just a great fit for this technology, because you're trying to go above and beyond the normal. And this gives ample opportunity to go above and beyond the Medicare requirements. So I think once people are going through this journey of seeing how their balance is changing, I mean, I've had tears, I've had people kissing me on the cheek, you know, they get their score and they're just so happy. It really represents hope for them, because they're going through life, you know, if they're in their 90s or late 80s, they're going through assuming that people are kind of disregarding them at this point, and they're starting to doubt themselves. And to see something that it shows the possibility, it reinstates that hope. That's a wonderful feeling as somebody who provides any kind of care. But I think the most meaningful story to share is that my grandmother was my father's mother. She's the one who fell 14 years ago when this was invented. It's taken a long time, multiple longitudinal studies and all the rest of it. But that was the initiation. And then after my father, who is mid-80s, low mid-80s now, he's been scoring low for a few years. And sure enough, at Thanksgiving, he had a nasty fall, lots of breaks. The good news is he is very excited about tracking his progress and seeing how he's going to be able to move himself up. So unfortunately, the scales are only just coming out right now. So even though they've been in a number of different facilities, COVID production, manufacturing has been a nightmare. So he himself has not had a scale to be able to use, but he'll be getting it, you know, in the next month. And it's giving him motivation to get himself to where he needs to be. And as his daughter, that is something that means the world.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Katie, for being with us. Again, if you want to learn more about this, you want to look at getting a scale for your practice, for you yourself, contact the team at ZIBRIO, ZIBRIO. That's Z as in zebra, I, B as in boy, RIO.com, ZIBRIO.com. Katie, you've been a wealth of information. I think you've given a lot of hope to a lot of doctors, a lot of encouragement. And I think that, yeah, you can see there. We'll put also this in the show notes. Katie, your email there is Katie, Katey, Katey at ZIBRIO.com. Katharine Forth, PhD, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, to doctors' attention. And I think that, as we say around here a lot, you know, for physicians listening, we'll close with this. It's no longer, I mean, about being the best doctor in the world anymore. It's about being the best doctor for the world, for your patients, and for your local community, and implementing technology like what we're seeing with ZIBRIO as a balance company, you know, is something that I think can change a lot of people's practices and lives. So, Katie, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Let's save the world from falling down together, shall we?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.